So as I mentioned last week, moving out of Romans 11 and into Romans 12, Paul shifts gears. And for 5 chapters now, chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, he describes what a free life looks like. What does freedom on the ground look like? And I mentioned last week that it's counterintuitive for us to think about freedom as the way Paul describes it here, which is self-forgetfulness. That's really the free life. Self-forgetfulness is freedom on the ground. It's counterintuitive for us to believe that, because what we've come to believe is that freedom is achieved, is found when we indulge ourselves, when we spend our lives getting and taking and achieving and accomplishing and all of those things. And if we can do those things, so the promise goes, we can find freedom and fullness of life. But what Paul does in these next 5 chapters, chapter 12 and onward, is he begins to describe what a free life actually looks like. And he has spent from chapters 4 through 11, he spent time describing what we've been freed from. We've been freed from sin and death and the demand to get it all right and the pressure to make it on our own. And so he's relieved us by removing the burden and showing us that Jesus has done for train wreck sinners like you and me what we could never ever do for ourselves. And he has freely distributed to sinners like us what we could never go out and get for ourselves. So he has spent all of that time telling us what we have been freed from, and now he shifts gears and shows us what we've been freed for. And the free life that Paul describes in this section, as I mentioned, is the life of self-forgetfulness. You see, everything, and this is what he's explained to us in chapters 4 through 11, everything we could ever possibly need and long for, we already possess because of what Jesus has done for us and given to us. So we don't need to fight for attention. We don't need to be on top. We don't need to win. We don't have to be right and get our way in order to be somebody. Because if you remember what Paul, in summary form, what Paul has said in chapters 4 through 11 is, you are not what you do. You are not who you can become. You are not what you can achieve. You are not what other people think of you. You are not your reputation. You are not what you do. You are, your identity is anchored in, locked in what Jesus has done for you. Well, when you understand that, when that grips your heart, then you realize I don't need to manipulate people in order to find meaning. I don't need to generate my own value. I don't need to secure my own worth and those sorts of things. And that is absolutely freeing. It's remarkably liberating. So he describes in these chapters a life of giving and deference and turning the other cheek and serving and loving. And we looked at some of those verses last week where Paul says, don't exact revenge on anybody. Don't just tolerate your enemies and those who persecute you in a variety of forms. Bless them. Take care of them. Serve them. He says some amazingly crazy stuff in those verses, and he continues to build on that here because he wants us to know that a life spent getting and taking is heavy. It's burdensome. I mean, just think about it. I mean, the more you take, the more you seek to get, the heavier life becomes. You begin to accumulate things, and you begin to accumulate feelings and burdens and all of that stuff. And so he wants to make the point that a life spent taking and getting and manipulating and extracting and fighting to be on top, and a life spent trying to win and get to the front and all of that stuff, that's a heavy life. And what Paul wants to show here is that Jesus' work on our behalf makes life light. And this is what he's describing. He's describing the light life. He's describing the free life. So the good works that Paul calls for in this section are not called for, remember, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, are not called for to establish standing with God, Paul gives us a blueprint for the free life and calls us to love and serve our neighbor, not because that love and service to our neighbor establishes our standing before God. Jesus has already established our standing before God. He calls for good works in order that we might serve our neighbor, that we might love our neighbor. And he brings up here in this section the whole issue of submission to governing authorities. And I'm like, the first time I read through it, I'm like, what in the world does that have to do with, how many of us really like the government? How many of us really trust politicians and what they do and, the court system and what they do? I'm like, what does this have to do? Paul is just waxed eloquent in chapter 12 about what it looks like to love and serve our neighbor because we have been loved and served by Jesus and set free from the burden of having to get stuff from other people. So now we're free to give everything to everybody. And how in the world does he go from that to this? Submission to governing authorities? What in the world does this have to do with a life of love and service to our neighbor? And the more I looked at it and the more I read it, I realized it actually has a lot to do with it because he's tapping into something that typically weighs us down and burdens us. Now, before I get into that, let me just say this. Just in case we think we are living during a time of governmental corruption and suppression and therefore free to ignore this section, however bad you think things may be, Paul was writing at a time where the government was way more corrupt, where there was way more oppression than anything we've ever experienced and will hopefully never experience, writing at a much worse time. The idea that Christians would submit to the Roman authorities seemed preposterous. It just didn't make any sense. When people ask me what I think about Jesus and politics, first of all, I hate politics, okay? If I really believed that the kingdom of God was flying in on Air Force One, I would have been a politician. I don't believe law can change human hearts, so I became a preacher. So when people ask me what I think about, Jesus and politics, I said, well, as far as I know, according to the Bible that I've read, Jesus has basically only said two things about politics and governing authorities. He says, number one, pay taxes. But the government's corrupt. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. Okay, so that's basically what he said. In other words, that was his way of saying, God knows what he's doing. My Father knows what he's doing. He's not been caught off guard by the corrupt leaders that are in charge. All of these people, regardless of what you think, have been appointed by God in some mysterious way. And so just, render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's. He doesn't ever call for a revolt, ever. And then the other thing he says is just love and pray for those in authority over you. Now, really? And the Christians of that day are going, you want us to pray for the Roman emperor? Nero used to literally drench Christians in tar and basically dig them, put them in the ground, and light them on fire as torches for his parties. Okay, this is the kind of corruption and the sickness that was going on there. And Paul has the audacity here to say, just submit to them, pray for them, serve them, honor them. And you're going, this makes no sense at all. I can't do that. And I don't want to do that. Okay, I can't do it. It just doesn't seem right. But here, what Paul's really getting at is, and he's saying that the burden to fix our corrupt culture is not on you, and you are therefore free to love and serve those who even lord it over you. You're free. You're not burdened with the pressure of having to fix everything. The Bible makes it very clear that we are not transformers of culture. We are witnesses to the one who alone can transform culture, which is Jesus. We are ambassadors, we're witnesses. But you and I can't fix anything that will last for a long period of time. Nothing. We look forward in hope to the time when Jesus comes back and makes all things new, and makes all of our sadness become untrue and all of those things. But in the meantime, we're giving people perhaps a snapshot of what will one day be a universal actuality when we love them and when we serve them. But you and I can't fix anything for the long haul. We can't. And human history should prove that to you and prove that to me, that we just don't have the capacity. And yet we try to fix and fix and fix and fix. And as a result of putting the burden on ourselves to fix and to change, we end up living a heavy life. And Paul's saying, the burden's not on you. The burden is not on you to make sure everything is right. You're free, in other words, going back to chapter 12, to bless those who persecute you with love and honor. You're free. That doesn't sound like freedom to me. It doesn't sound freeing. It doesn't sound like a light life to bless those who persecute you. What seems much more freeing to me is to punch those who persecute me. That's what we do. That's what I do. I love that stuff, okay? And that's what seems freeing. If I can, I told a friend the other day, there's one reason I don't have a gun, okay? Only one reason. And that is because if someone breaks into my house, I don't want to shoot them from afar. That would be so unsatisfying. I need to feel my fist hitting their face. That's the way I need to feel, okay? So I don't get a gun because I need the satisfaction of violence, you know? To anyone who would dare break in my house. Well, I mean, that's what seems freeing to me, you know? Now, I know you guys are thinking, he's sick, okay? I know I am. That's why I preach what I preach and believe what I believe. I am sick. I'll tell you this, though. If you do break in my house, I will hit you in the mouth, okay? But anyway, so, I mean, that's what seems freeing to me. You know, that's what seems freeing to me. And yet, Paul says, no, that's actually burdensome. That's the heavy life. What's freeing is being able to bless those who persecute you by loving them and honoring them. That's what's freeing. I mean, think about the freedom that exists when you don't ever feel like you need to get someone back. Doesn't the feeling of needing to get someone back make life heavy? I mean, I've been in that situation before, so have you. You're kind of consumed by it. You know, tit for tat. You got me, I'm gonna get you. And you become consumed by it. It preoccupies you. And you start thinking about what this person has done to you and how it hurts you and ways that you can get them back so that you can hurt them in return. That makes life heavy. It doesn't make life light. Forgiveness makes life light. Bitterness, anger, malice, the thirst to avenge your own self, that's what makes life heavy. It becomes a preoccupation for you. So, I mean, think about the burden that life becomes when you feel the need to fix things. You know, when you feel the need to fix things, when you feel the pressure to correct and change things and people, what happens to you? I'll tell you what happens to me. When I feel the pressure to fix things, when I feel that if this person's gonna change, it's on me to make sure change happens, I'll tell you what happens. I get anxious, I worry, I fret, because what if I don't get it done? What if I work and work and work to change and fix this person and they don't respond to my efforts, to my attempts? I mean, what will happen? What will happen? What will happen to that person? What will happen to me? You get anxious. Your livelihood, your happiness now becomes dependent on your ability to fix that person or your ability to fix that situation. And so you get anxious and you worry and you fret because you feel that if things are ever going to get right, it's on you to make it happen. And what takes place is, instead of loving and serving people and things, you're in fix-it mode all the time. And we're constantly in fix-it mode. We feel the pressure to fix ourselves. We feel the pressure to fix our circumstances. We feel the pressure to fix other people, our children, our spouse, whatever. We feel the pressure to fix culture. We are natural-born do-it-yourselfers. We don't have to be taught to do this stuff. We don't have to be convinced to do this stuff. That's what we do. We are addicted to self-salvation projects, and make no mistake, those things are self-salvation projects. I've told you before that, I've said it over and over and over again, that every attempt to fix someone else is actually a subtle attempt to fix yourself, because what you're actually saying is, I need you to become a certain way if I'm going to be happy. And so the propensity to change people and things, the propensity to fix people and things is really a problem in terms of our trying to save ourselves, rescue ourselves, find ourselves happiness and that sort of thing. And it not only makes life heavy, but it ruins any chance to enjoy anything or anybody at all. When you're a parent, especially of young kids, you basically have one goal in mind, and that is to raise your kids in such a way that they don't have sex before they're married, they don't do drugs, they don't mix up with the wrong people, they go to a good college, they get a good education, they get a good job, they marry a good person, they have good kids, and they die when they're 125 with lots of money in the bank. Okay, that's basically the goal. I don't know if anybody, first of all, I don't want to be that old when I die. If I get to the point where someone has to change my diaper, I'm out, okay? Pull the plug. Just pull it. Anyway, it's a little side note. So I'm saying it here and now. If I get to that point and you are the last person alive, tell the doctor, pull the plug. Okay, I don't want it. But that's basically the goal. No one who has kids hears what I just said and said, I don't want that for them. And so what we do is we govern sort of our parenting around trying to do everything right. And if you grew up in a dysfunctional home, which is all of us, at some level, we do everything we can to avoid the mistakes that we perceive our parents made with us. And so we're going to do it right, especially if you're a young parent like I was. You're remarkably idealistic. You're going to get it right. You're going to do it right. You're going to do everything that needs to be done to ensure that your children turn out right. And what ends up happening, at least it happened to me, and it's probably happened to you too if you have kids, when you live in fix-it mode with your kids, you just simply don't enjoy them. They're your projects. You don't enjoy them. It's even hard to really, really love them unconditionally because you've put so many barriers in the form of standards and expectations between you and them and the intimacy that could otherwise be there that you don't even really enjoy it. I actually started enjoying my kids much more when I stopped trying to fix them. Literally. Now, it's not that we don't correct and discipline when necessary, but there's a big difference between disciplining in love and trying to fix them. And they know the difference. The people around you know the difference. When you, with a close friend or a family member, within the context of a loving relationship, offer a word of correction or offer a word of counsel or advice or something like that, the person can tell the difference regarding whether or not you are loving them or simply trying to fix them. Loving them is very liberating. Trying to fix them is very burdensome, both for the one who you're trying to fix and for you, the fixer. And so, think about this. Does always trying to fix other people generate relational closeness or distance? Think about yourself. Do you like hanging out with people that are constantly trying to fix you? Do you enjoy the company of people who are constantly trying to change you? Who are constantly sort of pointing out ways, and they do it, they do it under the super spiritual heading of, well, we're just speaking the truth in love, brother, There's nothing worse than someone who calls you brother and someone who adds to that, well, I'm just speaking the truth in love. Has anyone who's ever said, I'm just going to speak the truth in love for you, ever made you feel like you're really loved? Okay, now possibly that's happened to you because you've been in some remarkable way visited by Jesus, but anybody else and everybody else who's ever sat down anywhere and someone looks at you and says, I'm going to speak the truth in love to you, brother or sister, it's like if I'm in a situation like that, I'm already starting to tune out already. And you are too. That's what criticism and all of those things are a form of law. We need to hear that stuff, especially if we're veering to the left or veering to the right. It's not that we don't need to hear that stuff, but the idea that criticism and even constructive criticism, we use all of these fancy, seemingly pietistic phrases to describe what we just simply want to do, which is change you. Okay, constructive criticism, speaking the truth in love, that sort of thing. We just start tuning out. We want to get out because that stuff we know can't ultimately change us. So you think about it. Does always trying to fix others generate relational closeness or relational distance? And then ask the further question, which is, does relational distance make life feel heavier or lighter? Does relational intimacy, if things are not going well inside your home, okay, you're not getting along with your spouse, things with your children aren't going right, whatever the case may be, when things in your home are not going well, does that make life feel lighter? Does relational distance inside your home make life feel lighter? Or does it make it feel heavier? It feels like a thorn in your side that desperately needs to be removed. And so you say, okay, does always trying to fix other people change other people? Does it generate relational closeness or relational distance? And if it generates relational distance, that makes life feel heavier. And so what Paul's saying here is we have this propensity to fix and to change and to make things right on our own. And when we do that, we fail to live into the freedom that he describes here, which is you're actually free to submit to your governing authorities. You're free to pay honor to the one who's owed honor and respect to the one who's owed respect. You're free to do that. You don't need to withhold that stuff and keep it to yourself. You're free to give it away. You're free to bless those who persecute you. You're free to turn the other cheek. You're free to love and serve not just your friends, but your enemies. You're free to do that stuff. Because everything you need in Christ you already possess, you are now free to give away everything you have without needing anything in return. And so what Paul is saying here is you don't have to live in fix-it mode. That's freedom. That went to the ears of faith. That's so liberating. It's so burden removing. I don't have to live in fix-it mode. Men and women live in fix-it mode in different ways. Sometimes the same way, but they live in fix-it mode in different ways. And what Paul's saying here is you don't have to live in fix-it mode. You don't have to live in fix-it mode when it comes to the government. You don't have to live in fix-it mode when it comes to one another. You don't have to live in fix-it mode. You don't. And therefore, when you stop living in fix-it mode, because you trust that Jesus has already done everything you need and has already given you everything you need, life becomes lighter. You're simply free to love and give. And this is true with everything, our relationships, our career, our church, everything. When you don't feel the need to fix and change and make everything right. You can try that for a while. Every one of us do. You can try that for a while. You can try to fix your kids every time. You can try your relationship with your children, your relationship with other people, your relationship with your employees, your relationship with your employer, your relationship with your friends, your neighbors, your family. You can live in fix-it mode to where you feel like this whole thing is riding on me, and if I don't fix this thing, it's doomed. You can live that way, but you won't enjoy those people, and I can promise you they won't enjoy you. And there will be absolutely no hope whatsoever for any kind of light reconciliation at all. Forgiveness frees. It really does free. When you forgive someone, it's like the prison doors are open. And you realize that the one who was locked inside was not the other person who wronged you, but yourself. And so what Paul is saying is, this is the kind of freedom that Jesus paid so dearly to secure for us. And we know that this is at the heart of what he's saying here, because he goes right into the next verses where he just comes straight out and says, love is the fulfillment of the law. I mean, he begins that in verse 8 where he says, love is the fulfillment of the law. At the heart of a free life is the dynamic of love. Self-sacrificial, unconditional love. And he says, essentially, that law-abiding people are loving people. Love is the fulfillment of the law. And this goes back to what I was saying a couple weeks ago. The reason Paul tells us not to engage in things like look at verse 13, orgies, drunkenness, sexual immorality, sensuality, quarreling, jealousy, and he went into a bunch of other stuff in chapter 12. The reason, and he also goes into that stuff in Galatians where he talks about the works of the flesh and compares that with the fruit of the Spirit. The reason we find sections in the Bible that tell us not to engage in things like that is not because these things block God's love for us. I said that a couple weeks ago. We make the mistake of thinking that these things are laid out for us because when we fail, and we do, these things block God's love for us. But that would fly in the face and completely contradict what he said in Romans 8, which he said, essentially, nothing can block God's love for you. You didn't earn it. You can't lose it. God's love for you is anchored in what Jesus has done, not what you do or fail to do. So he doesn't lay these things out and say, avoid them, run away from them because these things block God's love for us. The reason he lays these things out and tells us to avoid them and not to engage in them is because these things block our love for others. And love is the fulfillment of the law, and love is freedom. Love is the essence of a free life. And we have this idea that sin blocks God's love for us, and when we fail, it blocks God's love for us. Well, we have to go and rip out lots and lots and lots of pages in the Bible if we conclude that. We have to. Because there are so many places that talk about God's unwavering, unconditional love for adopted sons and daughters that cannot change. It will not waver. There is nothing that can separate you from God's love for you in Christ Jesus. Height nor depth, things above, things below, good days, bad days, whatever the case may be, your unrighteousness, your self-righteousness, your morality, your immorality, whatever the case may be. Because God has done for you what you could never do for yourself and given Jesus on your behalf. In my place condemned he stood, sealed my pardon with his blood. Hallelujah, what a Savior. I'm in forever. I don't have to worry about the vertical anymore. Okay, I don't have to be overly concerned anymore with how God feels about me, because he feels about me the way he feels about Jesus. Because I'm in Jesus. Jesus is in me. I'm clothed. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, I am locked in a prison of righteousness. I can't get out. I'm clothed. I live my life in an irremovable suit of forgiveness. That's what God says about us vertically. And now he says horizontally. So the reason I lay these things out is because I'm showing you what it looks like to love your neighbor. And when you indulge in these kinds of things, you're hurting yourself. You're enslaving yourself. And because you're not loving, you're not giving, you're taking. You're making life heavier for you when you engage in these sorts of things. And Paul is now in this section, he's focusing on the horizontal plane rather than the vertical one. He's not telling us what we need to do to keep God's love, but he's telling us what gets in the way of loving others, which is the essence of freedom. So when he says in verse 8, owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, and he makes the connection here. Okay, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And this is the way we typically read these things, because all of us are adulterers, all of us. There is not one of us, according to the Bible, there is not one of us in this room, man, woman, boy, girl, baby. That is not all, you are born an adulterer. Okay, I mean, the Bible makes it abundantly clear that we don't come into this world with clean hands. We come into this world with dirty hands. We come into this world at enmity with God because of our natural born rebellion, our natural desire to want to be our own God. So we typically read these things and go, okay, you should not commit adultery, you should not murder, you should not steal, you should not covet. When I do those things, God stops loving me. And what we do is we make the mistake that Paul corrects here, which is we think about those laws, those directives, as a way to keep God's love for us vertically. But Paul plainly puts this on the horizontal plane. Plainly. He says the reason you don't do these things, the reason you should stay away from these things, is because these things block love for our neighbor. And when we're not loving our neighbor, but rather loving ourselves by indulging in self-indulgence, life becomes heavy, and you weren't recreated for heaviness, you were recreated for lightness. You weren't recreated for slavery. You've been rescued out of slavery into freedom. And so he's saying these are the kinds of things that get in the way of your freedom. I mean, this is God's goal for you. It's God's goal for me. Jesus tells us what God's goal is for us in Luke 4 when he says, and it's hanging all over the place on this campus, I've come to set the captives free. I have come to deliver freedom. I've come to give you what you can't get for yourself, which is a light life. You are perpetually prone to burdening yourselves. And I say, cast all of your cares and all of your burdens at my feet. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I mean, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I've carried it all the way for you. So it's a done deal. And what Paul's saying here is when you indulge yourself, when you live for you rather than for one another, life becomes heavy. Life becomes burdensome. And so he keeps going and says, you shall love your neighbors yourself. And then in verse 10 sums it up by saying, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. And so you go, okay, we think about law and love in some pretty distinct and different ways. And what Paul does here is he says, love grants what the law demands. The law demands, and I've said this before, sanctification or the nature of the Christian life can be defined with this sentence, basically. Love God and love neighbor. That's it. Someone wants to ask me or someone wants to ask you, what is sanctification? Every time I look up Tullian on Google, it always brings up the word sanctification, okay, for whatever reason. Not because I'm sanctified, but because I argue with people about this stuff all the time. What is it? What is it? We have a variety of different definitions for it. What is it? It's simple. Love for God and love for neighbor. That's it. Well, what produces love for God and love for neighbor? Is it being told to love God and love our neighbor? Do you ever love someone just because you're told to love them? We make this mistake where we actually think that when we say love me, that generates love. Love me does not generate love. I love you generates love. And you know that. You know that in your relationships. If there's someone that you know that is feeling unloved, or if you're feeling unloved and you go to that person and you say, love me, I deserve your love me. Do you get love back from that person? Or does an argument ensue? I do love you. What are you talking about? You love me. Okay? That stuff happens. It's never happened in my house, ever. But that stuff does happen in your homes, okay? That doesn't work. Love me doesn't work. I love you is what generates love. And so we're told that we love him because he first loved us. Love begets love. Love generates love. And what he's saying here is that life after justification does not eliminate good works. It just, as one theologian puts it, it just horizontalizes them. It just says, oh, this is taken care of. So now you're set free because everything you need in Christ you already possess. All the love and acceptance and approval that you long for is already yours. So now you're free to give. You're free to love. You're free to love others as you have been loved. And what Paul makes very clear here, and it corrects a mistake that we often make, the law is not for getting God to love us. So we think that was the mistake. Remember Paul back in Romans 11 made the point that was the mistake that the Israelites way back in the day made. God delivered them the law on Mount Sinai through Moses, and they saw it as a checklist of ways that they could get God to love them. They treated it that way. And what Paul does here is he shows that the law is not for getting God to love us. We better hope it's not. Because none of us are law keepers. Even if we do okay on the outside, we're blowing it on the inside. And so the law is not for getting God to love us. It's a blueprint for serving others. It shows us what love for others looks like, which includes things like don't indulge yourself. You'll make your life heavier if you do. I mean, you'll make your life heavier and you won't be set free to give and to serve. And this love for others, imperfect as it may be, is only possible because God first loved us. What Paul's saying here is not, okay, so your love, when he says here, okay, when he says in verse 10, love does no wrong to a neighbor, you can misread that and go, so, I mean, I've got to be perfect. And that's not what he's saying. He's saying the dynamic of love is always other-centered. It does no wrong to the neighbor. That's the dynamic of love. Now, the love that we possess from God is perfect, but the love that we distribute to others is imperfect because we're imperfect. We're broken. Our horizontal distribution of love will never be infallible. Okay, so it's not like once we get this, we'll be able to love unconditionally without interruption. There'll still be relational tension. There'll still be frustration. There'll still be strain in your marriage and all of those things. But where that stuff exists, it's because there's a lack of love, because love does no wrong to your neighbor. And when we experience those moments, we don't do more and try harder. We throw ourselves back on the unwavering, unconditional, amazing love of God, which recalibrates us, if even for a moment, and enlivens us even for a moment, until we love before we blow it again. And that's the rhythm. It's the rhythm of the Christian life. It's not an escalator of progress. If anything, Christian growth is downward, not upward. We're coming to deeper and deeper terms with our own desperation, our own need. We're coming to deeper and deeper terms with our own weakness, with our own incompetency, and we're coming to deeper and deeper terms with Jesus' strength and competency for us. That's really the rhythm of the Christian life. And so what Paul is saying here is that the good news of the gospel is that Jesus did not wait until we were loving before he loved us. He didn't even wait till we asked him to love us before he loved us. He loved us in our unloveliness. He came to us not when we were good, but when we were bad. He came to us not because we were pretty, but because we were ugly. He came to us not because we were strong, but because we were weak. He came to us not because we were moral and had it all together, but because we were immoral and didn't have anything together. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, Paul says. And this love for us, this crazy, counterintuitive, radical, descending one-way love that God gives to us, births love in us, which bleeds love through us to those around us. Okay, I'll say that again. I wrote it down last night like 1 a.m. because I wanted to be poetic and get it right, you know? This love for us births love in us, which bleeds love through us to those around us. It's never perfect. It's always broken love. It's always fallible love. But where love happens And where love does exist, like I said, even for a moment, a day, a season, liberation happens. We smell freedom. We experience it. The people around us experience it. Well, Paul is saying the only way we can imperfectly love those around us is if we know down deep in our heart that we are perfectly loved by God. There is no love for others if we doubt God's love for us. What might look like love for others on the outside isn't really love for others. We're loving in those moments because we need to get love back. We're making a deal. That's what we're doing. We're loving. I've said this before, but there is not one. I've done 10,000 weddings. Okay, maybe 20,000. No, maybe like 100. But I've done a lot of weddings, and of course I experienced my own wedding. And there is not one wedding I've ever experienced. There is not one couple that has ever gotten married who stands up and says "I do" to one another solely, wholeheartedly, exclusively because they want to spend the rest of their lives giving. You might think, well, no, that's what I did. No, you did not. And you don't know yourself. You're a lot worse than you think you are. I mean, it's a transaction at some level. We're not conscious of the fact that it's a conditional transaction, but it's a transaction. I mean, I'm marrying you because I expect my life to be better because of you. I need to get from you. Okay, I need to get from you, and I will give to you to the degree that I get from you. And what happens 3 years, 5 years, 3 months into the marriage when you realize that's not happening, you're not getting what you signed up for? I mean, that's when relational tension happens. Relational tension happens when you begin to realize this wasn't simply about me getting because she's not giving or he's not giving, and therefore I'm going to stop giving. And then there's a standoff, a relational standoff. Well, you see, where love does not exist, slavery does. I mean, where love is not happening, burdens pile up. And so what Paul is saying here is that the only thing that can enable us to experience any kind of light living and liberation is love, which is remarkable to me because that's not typically the way we think. We think, well, the only way to make life work is to do everything properly, to do everything right, to avoid the bad stuff, to pursue the good stuff, to dot our I's, to cross our T's, to make sure we stay away from the bad people and hang out with the good people and do all of the things that we know we ought to do. In other words, saving ourselves by keeping the law. And what Paul's saying here is love is the dynamic that sets you free. Love is the dynamic that sets you free. God's perfect love has set you free to love others. And loving others is the free life. Let me close with this. I close my book, Surprised by Grace, with a story from Civil War days before American slaves were freed and I don't know if this is a true story or not. It could simply be parabolic. But it's a story about a northerner who went to a slave auction and purchased a young slave girl. And they walked away from the auction, and the man turned to the girl and told her, "You're free." And this is their conversation. With amazement, she responded, You mean I'm free to do whatever I want?" "Yes," he said. "And to say whatever I want to say?" "Yes, anything." "And to be whatever I want to be?" "Yep." "And even go wherever I want to go?" "Yes," he answered with a smile. "You're free to go wherever you'd like." She looked at him intently and replied, "Then I will go with you." Now, there are a lot of people out there who fear that grace-delivered, blood-bought freedom to do, say, and be whatever we want will result in loveless license. That if we trumpet this and champion this one-way, descending, unconditional love of God for sinners like us, it's going to produce apathy, and it's going to produce spiritual laziness, and it's going to produce loveless license. But as this story illustrates, redeeming unconditional love alone, not law, not fear, not punishment, not guilt, not shame. Redeeming unconditional love alone carries the power to compel heartfelt loyalty to the one who gave us and continues to give us what we don't deserve. And that loyalty that his love compels from us shows itself in loving unlovely people because we've been loved. By giving to selfish people because we are selfish and have been given to. In other words, we not just love him because he first loved us. We love them because he first loved us. And that's freedom. That's freedom. If you just stop and think about how liberating and non-stressful life would be if we'd stopped trying to get. And we won't, okay? We won't. You'll walk out of here, I'll walk out of here, and we'll seek to get the moment we walk out the door. I mean, that's just our natural default mode. I mean, we're stubborn people, okay? I've said before what John Calvin said, which is we are partly unbelievers until we die. I mean, this just seems too good to be true, and we're broken people, and therefore it's seemingly impossible to believe that this love that has been given to us is not only free, but it's perfect. And has therefore liberated me to love others. We just don't believe it. We're still trying as hard as we can to get and to take. But for those few and fleeting moments when you do believe that everything you need in Christ you have, and you're able to look at your friends and you're able to look at your family, you're able to look at your enemies and your oppressing boss, you're able to look at the president and politicians, you're able to look at your rebellious teenager, and you're able to say, I love you with no strings attached. It's my honor to serve you with no strings attached. I'm not trying to fix you. I just want to love you. You and I both know how unbelievably liberating that is, and that liberation is only made possible because Jesus came to set the captives free by loving us now and forever.